They say justice is blind. But what happens when those entrusted with upholding it fail their duty? In the heart of Denver, amidst its bustling streets and diverse communities, a rookie officer's rash decision collides with the unwavering resolve of a judge committed to exposing the truth. This isn't just a story of courtroom drama. It's a profound exploration of accountability, redemption, and the collective effort to rebuild trust in our justice system. Meet Officer Samantha Taylor, fresh out of the academy, full of ambition and confidence. She believed her badge granted her authority, a belief that would soon lead her into controversy. A routine call spiraled into a public reckoning when her arrest of Darren Washington, a young black man waiting for his sister, revealed deep-seated biases and systemic flaws within the police department. Darren's calm demeanor, recorded by bystanders, told a story starkly different from the one Samantha tried to craft in her report. The case landed in the courtroom of Judge Malcolm Porter, a man known as the Scale for his relentless pursuit of fairness. Having experienced wrongful imprisonment in his youth, Porter has made it his life's work to dismantle the very biases that once cost him his freedom. As this gripping tale unfolds, Samantha is forced to confront her actions, and Darren's bravery becomes a catalyst for change far beyond his own case. How far would you go to stand up for justice? Would you choose integrity over comfort? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this inspire you to think critically about the world around us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's uncover the truth and explore what it means to create a fairer, more just society. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Officer Samantha Taylor's apartment as she meticulously adjusted the collar of her crisp new uniform. She studied her reflection, her badge catching the light, gleaming like a promise. Today marked her first solo patrol in Denver's 5th District, a neighborhood often described with the polite euphemism of complex community dynamics. Samantha saw it as a proving ground, a place to show her superiors that she was tough, capable, and ready to enforce the law. The crackle of her radio snapped her out of her thoughts. "Suspicious person reported near the corner of Marshall and 5th, the dispatcher's voice announced. Samantha's adrenaline surged. She quickly responded, "Unit 52 en route," and headed to her patrol car. This was her chance to demonstrate decisiveness and authority, qualities she believed were essential to good policing. As Samantha approached the scene, she noted the convenience store's ordinary exterior. The reported suspicious person stood just outside. A young black man dressed in business attire, his posture relaxed as he glanced down at his phone. Samantha parked her car and stepped out, her hand resting on her utility belt. The man looked up, startled but composed. "Sir," Samantha began, her voice firm, "what are you doing here?" He raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the question. "I'm waiting for my sister. She works at the dental office next door. We're meeting for lunch." Her training kicked in, and Samantha's eyes scanned the area. "We've had a report of suspicious activity," she said, her tone clipped. "Can I see some ID?" The man, Darren Washington, hesitated for a moment. "Suspicious activity? I'm just standing here," he replied evenly, reaching for his wallet. The calmness in his voice irked Samantha in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them," she ordered, her voice rising slightly. Darren froze, his hands now raised in a gesture of compliance. Around them, a few pedestrians paused to watch the exchange, their curiosity turning to concern. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. "Look," Darren began, his voice steady but firm. "I'm just waiting for my sister. She'll be out any minute. This is a misunderstanding." To Samantha, his response felt dismissive, even defiant. Her grip tightened on her belt. "Misunderstanding or not, I'll need you to step aside," she said, motioning for him to move away from the store's entrance. When Darren didn't immediately comply, she took it as resistance. "Are you refusing to follow instructions?" she demanded. "I'm not refusing," Darren replied, holding his ground. "I just want to know why I'm being treated like this." The back and forth attracted more attention from bystanders. Phones now captured every word, every movement. The tension in the air was palpable. To Samantha, Darren's calm yet questioning demeanor felt like a challenge to her authority. Within moments, she made her decision. "Turn around," she ordered. When Darren hesitated, her tone sharpened. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for resisting instructions." The handcuffs clicked into place, their metallic sound cutting through the murmurs of the growing crowd. Just as Samantha began leading Darren to her patrol car, a woman burst out of the dental office next door, her voice full of panic. "What are you doing?" she cried. "That's my brother. He's here to pick me up for lunch. Let him go." Samantha barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, step back," she said curtly. "This is a police matter." The woman's protests grew louder, drawing more onlookers. Darren's expression remained stoic, but his shoulders sagged under the weight of humiliation. He caught his sister's eyes and shook his head slightly, as if to reassure her that he'd be okay. Back at the precinct, Samantha sat at her desk, typing up her report. She meticulously crafted a narrative that framed Darren as uncooperative and suspicious, emphasizing her own professionalism and the need to de-escalate what she described as a potentially volatile situation. To her, it was a routine arrest, a demonstration of vigilance and adherence to procedure. But outside the confines of her carefully worded report, a different story was spreading. The bystander videos, shared on social media within hours, painted a starkly contrasting picture. Darren's calm demeanor, his polite questions, and Samantha's escalating demands were all on display for the world to see. The footage ignited outrage online, with hashtags calling for accountability trending across platforms. By the following morning, the incident had become a local headline: "Man arrested while waiting for sister sparks controversy." Community. Leaders demanded answers, activists organized protests, and journalists began digging into Samantha's record. What she had viewed as a successful day on patrol was quickly unraveling into a public relations disaster for the department. The situation drew the attention of Judge Malcolm Porter. Sitting in his chambers, he reviewed the preliminary details of the case. His sharp eyes scanned Samantha's report, noting the carefully constructed language and the discrepancies already flagged by Darren's attorney. "Pull the body cam footage," he instructed his clerk. "I want a full timeline, including the dispatch call and witness statements." For Porter, this wasn't just another case. It was a reflection of the systemic issues he had spent his career confronting. As he leaned back in his chair, his mind wandered briefly to his own past, to the 3 months he had spent in juvenile detention for a crime he didn't commit. He had felt the same helplessness, the same indignity that Darren must have felt, standing in those handcuffs. With a heavy sigh, Porter refocused. This wasn't just about one man or one officer. It was about the trustworthiness of the entire system, and in his courtroom, there would be no room for excuses. Judge Malcolm Porter was not just another figure behind the bench. Known across Denver as The Scale, he earned his nickname for his unwavering commitment to fairness and truth. His decisions were meticulous, his questions probing, and his demeanor resolute. To those who entered his courtroom, it was clear that justice wasn't just an ideal to him, it was a mission. Porter's relentless pursuit of justice was born from personal experience. Decades earlier, as a teenager, he had been wrongfully accused of robbery. The evidence against him was thin, but it was enough to land him in juvenile detention for 3 months. Those months left an indelible mark on him, not just because of the humiliation and helplessness he endured, but because of the systemic indifference he witnessed. When his name was finally cleared, Porter resolved that no one else should have to endure what he did. That resolve shaped his career. From his early days as a public defender to his current role as a judge, Porter became known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. He demanded thorough investigations, evidence-based decisions, and above all, accountability from everyone who entered his courtroom, whether they wore a badge or not. When Darren Washington's case crossed his desk, Porter immediately noticed red flags. The language in Officer Samantha Taylor's report struck him as overly rehearsed, the details too conveniently aligned to justify her actions. It was the kind of narrative that raised more questions than it answered. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the report one more time before calling his clerk. "Pull the body cam footage," he instructed, "and get me the dispatch records. I want statements from every witness who was there." The clerk nodded, accustomed to Porter's thoroughness. "Yes, Judge. I'll have everything compiled by the end of the day." As the evidence began to pile up, Porter's intuition was confirmed. The body cam footage contradicted Samantha's report, showing Darren's calm and measured demeanor throughout the interaction. The dispatch call, which had been the initial justification for her actions, lacked any real detail. It was a vague report that could have been about anyone. Witness testimonies painted an even more damning picture, highlighting Samantha's escalating behavior and Darren's clear attempts to defuse the situation. In the quiet of his chambers, Porter's mind returned to his own past. He could still remember the cold, unyielding walls of the detention center. He remembered the weight of the accusation, the way every plea of innocence seemed to fall on deaf ears. That feeling of powerlessness had stayed with him, driving him to ensure that others wouldn't be ignored by the system. He ran his hand over the edge of his desk, the wood smooth from years of use, and let out a long breath. To him, this wasn't just another trial. Darren's case was a window into something far more significant. It was a chance to confront the training, policies, and culture that had led a rookie officer to see an innocent man as a threat. Porter resolved to approach the trial with the same thoroughness he always did. But he also knew this case carried a weight that went beyond the facts. It was about trust. Trust in the justice system and trust in those tasked with upholding it. As the trial date approached, Porter made it clear to both the prosecution and defense that he expected nothing less than full transparency. "We're not just deciding the outcome of this case," he told them in a pre-trial meeting. "We're examining the integrity of the system that allowed it to happen." Outside the courtroom, the case had already captured the public's attention. News outlets covered it extensively, framing it as a test of accountability in policing. Community leaders organized rallies, calling for justice not just for Darren, but for others who had faced similar treatment. The courtroom was shaping up to be more than a place of legal arguments. It was becoming a stage for a broader reckoning. Inside his chambers, Porter prepared meticulously. He reviewed precedents, studied the evidence, and drafted questions that would leave no room for evasion. He knew that his role wasn't just to preside over the trial, but to ensure that every piece of truth came to light. Late one evening, as he reviewed the case files for the third time, Porter paused. He picked up a photo from his desk, a younger version of himself, fresh out of law school, standing with his parents outside a courthouse. They had fought so hard to clear his name, believing in a justice system that had failed them before. Now, decades later, he was in a position to ensure it didn't fail others. By the time the trial began, Porter was ready. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. As he took his seat and called the proceedings to order, he felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. But for Porter, that weight wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility, one he was determined to carry with unwavering resolve. The courtroom was a hive of tension and anticipation as the trial began. Every seat was filled with reporters, community members, and legal experts, all watching intently. For many, this was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a reflection of larger societal issues. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead prosecutor began, "this case is about accountability. It's about trust in our justice system and ensuring that those who wield authority are held to the highest standards." She gestured toward a large screen at the front of the courtroom. "Now, let's see what actually happened that day." The room went silent as body cam footage from Officer Samantha Taylor played. The video began with Samantha stepping out of her patrol car, her tone firm but calm as she approached Darren Washington. The jury's attention was rapt as they saw Darren's relaxed posture, his clear and polite responses, and the way he kept his hands visible. "I'm waiting for my sister," he explained in the video. "She works next door." The footage continued, showing how Samantha's tone escalated as Darren calmly asked questions about why he was being stopped. The prosecution paused the video to address the jury. "Notice how Mr. Washington complies with every directive. He's calm, he's respectful, yet Officer Taylor perceives his actions as a threat. Why?" Next, the prosecutor presented footage from bystanders. Taken from multiple angles, these videos showed a composed Darren, visibly confused but cooperative. They also captured Samantha's increasingly stern demeanor and eventual decision to handcuff him. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the reality of the situation became undeniable. Testimonies followed. Darren's sister, Michelle, was among the first to take the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted the moment she stepped outside the dental office to see her brother in handcuffs. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," she said, her voice breaking. "He was just waiting for me. To see him treated like that, like he was some kind of criminal. It broke my heart." Other witnesses described the scene with similar disbelief and frustration. One bystander, a local store clerk, testified, "He wasn't doing anything wrong. I've seen him around before, he's always polite. But that officer, she came in with her mind already made up." The prosecution's case was compelling, bolstered by the emotional weight of the testimonies and the clarity of the video evidence. Darren's calmness, contrasted with Samantha's escalating demeanor, painted a picture of an officer who had misjudged the situation. Samantha's defense, however, clung to the concept of reasonable suspicion. Her attorney argued that officers are often required to make quick decisions in high-pressure situations. "Policing is not a perfect science," he told the jury. "Officer Taylor acted in the interest of public safety. She didn't have the luxury of hindsight that we have today." As Samantha took the stand, her demeanor was composed but strained. She described feeling a sense of duty to respond to the call about a suspicious person, and insisted her actions were based on training and protocol. "I believed I was acting in the best interest of the community," she said. "When someone hesitates to comply, it can escalate quickly. I've seen it happen before." But under cross-examination, cracks began to show. The prosecutor's tone was firm but controlled. "Officer Taylor, let's discuss the moment you approached Mr. Washington. What exactly did he do to make you feel threatened?" Samantha hesitated. "He was standing near the entrance looking around. It seemed suspicious." "Looking around," the prosecutor repeated. "Isn't that something most people do when they're waiting?" "Yes, but—" Samantha faltered. "In that moment, I felt something was off." The prosecutor pressed on. "Officer Taylor, did Mr. Washington raise his voice, make any sudden movements, refuse to comply with your instructions?" "No, but he asked questions," she said, her voice quieter now. The prosecutor paused, letting the jury absorb the exchange. "Officer Taylor," she said finally, "could it be that you interpreted Mr. Washington's calm questions as defiance because it challenged your authority?" Samantha's silence hung heavy in the air. Before she could respond, Judge Malcolm Porter interjected. "Officer Taylor," he said, his deep voice resonating through the room. "Can you honestly say that Mr. Washington's actions justified your response, or were you seeing what you were trained to see?" The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard. Samantha lowered her gaze. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she murmured, her confidence visibly shaken. The trial's most powerful moment came when Darren himself took the stand. Standing tall, he spoke with a quiet dignity that resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom. "I've always tried to do everything right," he began. "I follow the rules, I respect authority. But that day, none of it mattered. I was handcuffed and humiliated in front of strangers for simply waiting for my sister." His voice wavered as he described the impact the incident had on him. "It's not just about me," he said. "It's about everyone who's been treated this way and didn't have cameras or witnesses to prove their innocence. It's about a system that needs to change." Darren's words struck a chord. Several jurors dabbed their eyes, and even Samantha seemed visibly moved. It was clear that his testimony had shifted the emotional tide of the trial. In his closing remarks, Judge Porter addressed the court with the gravity the moment demanded. "This case is not just about a single interaction," he said. "It's about trust in our officers, our institutions, and the systems that are meant to protect us. That trust is fragile, and when it is broken, the consequences ripple far beyond the individuals involved." The case was left in the jury's hands, but the implications were clear. This trial was a pivotal moment, not just for Darren Washington and Samantha Taylor, but for a community reckoning with the broader questions of justice, bias, and accountability. The trial had reached its midpoint, and the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing day. What began as an examination of a single officer's actions had snowballed into something far larger. The evidence presented wasn't just about Darren Washington's arrest. It was about a system that had allowed incidents like this to become almost routine. The morning session began with the prosecution presenting a series of documents obtained from internal police records. These included training manuals, incident reports, and internal memos that painted a troubling picture. "This is not an isolated incident," the lead prosecutor stated firmly. "The culture within this department perpetuates bias, fosters mistrust, and prioritizes authority over justice." One of the documents displayed on the courtroom screen was a training slide titled "Command Presence." The slide emphasized maintaining control at all costs and included language that subtly encouraged officers to view civilians as adversaries. The jury's faces reflected a mix of disbelief and discomfort as they read phrases like "assert dominance" in uncertain situations and "compliance is non-negotiable." The most damning piece of evidence came in the form of internal communications between officers. These messages revealed a pattern of exaggerating reports to justify arrests, particularly in neighborhoods with high minority populations. One email read, "If they look like trouble, write it up like they are." The room fell silent as the weight of these words sank in. The prosecution then called Sergeant James Russell to the stand. Russell, who had been Samantha Taylor's training officer, approached with visible reluctance. His weathered face betrayed years of service and the burden of unspoken truths. Under direct examination, Russell initially stuck to carefully worded answers. "Our training programs are designed to prepare officers for a variety of scenarios," he said, avoiding eye contact with the prosecutor. But the prosecution's strategy was clear. They weren't just questioning Russell about Samantha's actions. They were unraveling the culture that shaped her decisions. "Sergeant Russell," the prosecutor began, "you've trained dozens of rookies over the years. Would you say the department's training emphasizes empathy or authority? Russell hesitated. I'd say it's a balance. Officers need to maintain control in potentially dangerous situations. And what about in non-dangerous situations? The prosecutor pressed. Do officers receive guidance on how to de-escalate conflicts without resorting to authority-driven tactics? Russell's silence spoke volumes. After a long pause, he sighed deeply. Look, he said, his voice tinged with resignation. It's not written policy, but there's an unspoken rule. We're taught to project strength, to command respect. Rookies learn quickly that empathy can be seen as weakness. The room buzzed with whispers. Russell's words confirmed what many had suspected but few had dared to say aloud. So, the prosecutor continued, when Officer Taylor escalated her interaction with Mr. Washington, would you say she was following her training? Russell looked down, his hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. Yes, he admitted softly. She did what she thought she was supposed to do. The jury's reaction was palpable. This wasn't just about Samantha anymore. It was about an entire system that encouraged officers to prioritize authority over understanding. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, they attempted to shift the focus back to Samantha's individual judgment. Sergeant Russell, Samantha's attorney began. Are you saying that every officer is taught to act as Officer Taylor did in this case? Russell shook his head. No, but the culture. It influences how we think and act. It's subtle, but it's there. Judge Malcolm Porter, who had remained stoic throughout the trial, leaned forward slightly. His voice carried a quiet authority as he addressed Russell. Sergeant, in your professional opinion, what needs to change? Russell looked up at the judge, the weight of years of complicity etched on his face. Accountability, he said. We need to hold ourselves accountable from the top down. Training needs to focus on building trust, not just control. And we need to stop protecting officers who cross the line. Porter's expression didn't change, but his nod conveyed approval. Thank you, Sergeant, he said simply. The prosecution's next move was bold. They called for an independent review of the department's practices. Experts in law enforcement and criminal justice were brought in to testify about best practices and the dangers of unchecked authority. One expert, Dr. Elena Morales, explained how systemic biases could be perpetuated through training programs that emphasized fear and control over community engagement. When officers are trained to see every interaction as a potential threat, Dr. Morales said, it creates a mindset where even innocent behaviors are misinterpreted. This is especially harmful in communities that already have strained relationships with law enforcement. Her testimony was supported by data showing that departments with de-escalation-focused training had fewer incidents of excessive force and greater community trust. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, public interest in the trial grew. Protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Darren and reform the system." Local news stations aired segments highlighting the broader implications of the case, interviewing residents who shared their own experiences of being unfairly targeted. Inside, the pressure mounted on city leaders. Judge Porter called a special session, inviting the chief of police, city council members, and other officials to address the systemic failures being exposed. Justice cannot exist without accountability, Porter declared. This courtroom has revealed deep flaws in how this department operates. The question now is whether you have the courage to fix it. The chief of police, visibly uncomfortable, promised reforms. We're committed to rebuilding trust, he said, outlining plans for revised training protocols, an independent oversight board, and mandatory de-escalation courses. Porter's response was measured but firm. Promises are not enough, he said. Action is what matters. This court will hold you to your word. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury was left to grapple with the evidence. They had seen how one officer's actions were shaped by a broader culture of bias and unchecked authority. But they also saw glimpses of hope, a willingness, however reluctant, to confront these issues head-on. In his closing arguments, the prosecutor emphasized the importance of accountability. "This case is not just about Darren Washington or Samantha Taylor," she said. "It's about the values we hold as a society. Do we prioritize authority for its own sake, or do we strive for justice that is fair and equitable for all?" Judge Porter, in his final remarks before the jury deliberated, spoke directly to the broader implications of the case. "The events we've examined here are not anomalies," he said. "They are symptoms of a system that must change. Justice requires more than good intentions. It requires accountability, courage, and a commitment to do better." The courtroom fell silent as the jury left to deliberate. Outside, the city held its breath, waiting to see whether this case would be a turning point or just another moment of fleeting outrage. The courtroom was quieter now, the initial fervor of the trial giving way to an air of somber reflection. Samantha Taylor sat alone at the defense table, her once confident posture replaced by a visible weight of introspection. The trial had exposed not only her actions, but also the systemic issues that shaped them. Now, with the evidence laid bare, the time for reckoning had arrived. That evening, in a dimly lit office, Samantha met with her defense attorney, Angela Grant. The seasoned lawyer's face was lined with concern, but her voice was steady. "Samantha," Angela began, "the evidence is overwhelming. The videos, the testimonies, it's clear you made serious mistakes. But what matters now is how you choose to move forward." Samantha stared at the papers spread across the desk, the reports she'd written, the damning footage from her body cam, and the transcriptions of bystander accounts. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't see it," she admitted. "I thought I was just doing my job, but I wasn't. I let my biases cloud my judgment." Angela leaned forward, her gaze firm yet compassionate. "Acknowledging that is the first step, but you need to be ready to own it publicly. The court, the community, they need to hear you take responsibility." Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she grappled with the gravity of her actions. "I've ruined a man's life," she said, her voice breaking. "Not just Darren's, but his family's too. And I've made it harder for people to trust officers like me." Angela placed a hand on hers. "Redemption is possible, Samantha, but it starts with accountability." The following morning, the courtroom was filled once again. The trial had concluded, and the focus shifted to sentencing. Judge Malcolm Porter presided with his usual gravitas, but there was an added layer of solemnity in his tone as he addressed Samantha. "Officer Taylor," he began, "you stand here today not just as an individual accountable for your actions, but as a representation of a system that has failed in its duty to serve and protect equitably." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "I have reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony. While your actions were influenced by a flawed culture, the choices you made that day were your own. The question now is, what will you do to make amends?" Samantha's throat tightened. She glanced at Angela, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Rising from her seat, she approached the podium. The murmurs in the gallery faded as she began to speak. "Your Honor," she started, her voice trembling. "I've spent the past weeks reliving every moment of that day. I've seen the videos, read the reports, and listened to the people I've hurt. And I am deeply sorry." She paused, searching for the right words. "When I approached Mr. Washington, I didn't see a man waiting for his sister. I saw what I was trained to see, a potential threat. I let my biases take over, and I escalated a situation that didn't need escalating. For that, I take full responsibility." Her voice grew steadier as she continued. I know an apology isn't enough. I know I've damaged more than just one person's life. I've contributed to the mistrust between law enforcement and the community, and that's something I will carry with me for the rest of my life." Judge Porter's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. "What do you intend to do about it?" he asked. Samantha swallowed hard. "I want to do better. I want to be part of the solution. If given the chance, I'll work to address the biases in our training programs, to educate officers like me so they don't make the same mistakes. I'll speak out about what I've learned, even if it's uncomfortable." The gallery was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. For the first time, Samantha felt a flicker of hope that she could begin to make amends. Judge Porter leaned forward slightly, his voice measured. "Officer Taylor, redemption is not a single act. It is a journey, one that requires consistent effort and genuine change. This court will not excuse your actions, but I hope you use this moment as a turning point." He turned his attention to the courtroom. "This case has revealed flaws not just in one individual, but in an entire system. Let this serve as a reminder that justice demands accountability from all of us, officers, leaders, and citizens alike." Porter then announced Samantha's sentence: a combination of community service, mandatory bias training, and a suspended sentence contingent upon her participation in police reform initiatives. The decision drew mixed reactions, but it was clear that Porter's intent was to balance justice with the opportunity for rehabilitation. In the weeks that followed, Samantha began her mandated community service. Her assignments placed her directly in the neighborhoods she once patrolled, working alongside residents to rebuild trust. At first, the reception was cold. People were wary, and some outright refused to engage with her. But over time, Samantha's genuine efforts to listen and learn began to make a difference. She attended town hall meetings, participated in workshops on racial bias, and volunteered at local community centers. Each interaction was a step toward understanding the people she had once failed to serve. One day, while helping organize a youth event, Samantha encountered Darren Washington. The moment was tense, both of them unsure of what to say. Finally, Darren broke the silence. "Why are you here?" he asked, his tone cautious but not hostile. Samantha met his gaze. "Because I need to be. Because I want to understand what I got so wrong, and because I owe it to you and others to do better." Darren studied her for a long moment before nodding. "It's going to take more than words," he said simply. "I know," Samantha replied, "but I'm willing to put in the work." Months later, Samantha stood before a group of new police recruits, sharing her story as part of their training. "I was sitting where you are not too long ago," she began. "I thought I knew what it meant to wear this badge. I thought authority was about control, but I was wrong. Authority is a responsibility, not a right. And trust is something you earn every day." She paused, her voice steady. "I'm not here to tell you I've fixed everything. I'm here to tell you that you have a choice. You can follow the same flawed paths, or you can be better. The choice is yours." The recruits listened intently, some nodding, others deep in thought. Samantha's journey was far from over, but she was determined to use her experience to foster change. In the end, redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about facing it, learning from it, and committing to a future where justice and empathy could coexist. For Samantha, it was a long road ahead, but she was finally moving in the right direction. The trial of Officer Samantha Taylor didn't just end in the courtroom. It reverberated across the nation, igniting a much-needed conversation about policing, practices, and accountability. News outlets, social media platforms, and community forums buzzed with discussions about the systemic issues revealed during the trial. For many, this case was more than a singular event. It was a catalyst for change. In Denver, community leaders, activists, and law enforcement officials began working together to address the deep-rooted problems in their system. Town hall meetings were organized, drawing hundreds of residents eager to share their stories and voice their concerns. At one such meeting, Darren Washington stood before a packed auditorium, his voice steady but impassioned. "This isn't just about what happened to me," Darren said, his gaze sweeping the room. "This is about ensuring no one else has to experience what my family and I went through. It's about rebuilding trust and creating a system where justice isn't just a word but a reality." His words struck a chord, resonating with people from all walks of life. Darren's story became a rallying cry for those advocating for reform, and he quickly emerged as a prominent voice in the movement. Partnering with local organizations, he helped launch initiatives aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. One of the first major changes came in the form of updated training programs for police officers. Gone were the days of emphasizing command presence and rigid authority. Instead, the new curriculum focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and community engagement. Officers were taught to see themselves as partners in public safety, rather than enforcers of control. At the Denver Police Academy, a training session on implicit bias featured Dr. Elena Morales, a criminal justice expert who had testified during Samantha's trial. Standing before a room of cadets, she emphasized the importance of empathy in policing. "You're not just enforcing laws," she told them. "You're building relationships. When you approach a situation, ask yourself, how can I resolve this peacefully? How can I leave this person with their dignity intact?" The cadets listened intently, many of them nodding as Dr. Morales shared real-world examples of how empathy and understanding had defused potentially volatile encounters. The session ended with a standing ovation, a sign of the shifting mindset within the department. Judge Malcolm Porter, too, played a pivotal role in the reform efforts. Drawing on his decades of experience and personal history with systemic injustice, he worked closely with policymakers to establish independent oversight committees for police departments. These committees, composed of legal experts, community leaders, and former law enforcement officers, were tasked with reviewing misconduct cases and ensuring transparency in investigations. At a press conference announcing the initiative, Judge Porter spoke directly to the importance of accountability. "Trust is the foundation of effective policing," he said. "Without accountability, that trust crumbles." These oversight committees are not about vilifying officers, but about ensuring that the system serves everyone fairly. The reforms extended beyond Denver. Inspired by the city's efforts, other municipalities across the country began implementing similar changes. State legislatures passed laws mandating body cameras for officers and requiring regular reviews of use-of-force incidents. Training academies introduced mandatory courses on de-escalation and cultural awareness, and departments started partnering with community organizations to build stronger relationships with residents. Darren Washington, meanwhile, used his growing platform to advocate for justice reform on a national scale. He appeared on talk shows, spoke at conferences, and penned op-eds in major newspapers. In each appearance, he emphasized the need for systemic change and the role that communities must play in holding institutions accountable. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Darren often said. "It takes persistence, collaboration, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But we've seen what's possible when people come together with a shared purpose." One of his most impactful moments came during a speech at a National Criminal Justice Summit. Standing before an audience of policymakers, law enforcement officials, and activists, he shared the story of his arrest and its aftermath. "I'm not here to vilify every officer," he said. "I'm here to demand better training, better oversight, better accountability. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing: safe communities and a fair system. His speech earned a standing ovation and spurred several key policymakers to pledge their support for additional reforms. Darren's ability to bridge divides and focus on solutions made him a powerful advocate for change. Back in Denver, Samantha Taylor's journey of atonement continued. As part of her sentence, she worked closely with community organizations, participating in workshops and discussions about the impact of biased policing. Initially met with skepticism, she gradually earned respect for her willingness to confront her mistakes and contribute to the reform efforts. At one community meeting, a resident asked Samantha why she had chosen to stay involved rather than walk away. "Because walking away doesn't fix anything," she replied. "I've seen the damage I've caused, and I've felt the weight of that guilt. But I also believe in the possibility of change. I want to be part of that change." Her words were met with cautious applause, a sign that while forgiveness might be slow, the willingness to try was recognized. Over time, the impact of the reforms became evident. Complaints of excessive force decreased. Community trust surveys showed marked improvement, and more residents began participating in police oversight initiatives. The relationship between law enforcement and the community, though far from perfect, was steadily improving. Judge Porter remained a guiding force, reminding everyone that the work was ongoing. At a gathering to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the trial's conclusion, he addressed a diverse crowd of community members and officials. "Reform is not a destination," he said. "It's a journey. Every step we take toward accountability, fairness, and understanding brings us closer to the kind of justice system we all deserve. But we must remain vigilant. Change requires constant effort." As the sun set on the event, Darren Washington and Samantha Taylor crossed paths. There was no animosity in Darren's gaze, only a quiet determination. "Still working on that change?" he asked. Samantha nodded. "Every day." He extended a hand. "Good. Let's keep it going." The handshake was brief but symbolic, a reminder that even in the aftermath of injustice, there was room for reconciliation and progress. Together they represented the possibility of a better future, one where justice and accountability could coexist, and where the community and law enforcement could work hand in hand to create a safer, fairer society. The trial of Samantha Taylor and the unwavering bravery of Darren Washington will be remembered as more than just a courtroom drama. It stands as a profound reminder that justice is not an abstract ideal, but a collective responsibility. It demands the courage to speak out, the willingness to listen, and the strength to hold systems accountable while striving for a better future. Throughout the trial, we witnessed the transformation of individuals and communities alike. Darren Washington's resilience and determination turned his personal injustice into a powerful catalyst for change. Samantha Taylor's journey from denial to accountability illustrated the painful but necessary steps of atonement. And Judge Malcolm Porter's steadfast commitment to fairness demonstrated the essential role of leadership in pushing systems toward transparency and integrity. But these stories are not unique to Denver. Across the nation, similar struggles unfold daily, often unnoticed and unresolved. Darren's experience and his decision to fight for justice serves as a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of raising our voices. His actions and the reforms they sparked illuminate the impact one person can have when they choose to stand against systemic failures. As the trial concludes, Denver emerges as a city transformed, though still grappling with the realities of rebuilding trust. The reforms inspired by this case, new training programs, independent oversight committees, and a renewed focus on community engagement mark significant progress, yet they are only the beginning of a long journey toward equity and justice. Judge Porter's closing remarks during the trial resonate deeply. Justice is not a destination. It's a journey we must take together. It's the sum of every decision we make, every action we take, and every effort we put forth to ensure that fairness prevails. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it is necessary. If we want a system that truly serves all, then we must be willing to do the work. These words are a challenge, not just to the people in that courtroom, but to all of us. They remind us that justice doesn't simply happen. It requires action, it requires reflection, and most importantly, it requires each of us to ask ourselves, what role will I play? This story is not just about what went wrong, but about what can be made right. It's about the potential for redemption and the power of accountability. It's about how communities can come together to demand better from their institutions, and how individuals can take responsibility for their actions and commit to growth. Darren Washington's work didn't stop at the courthouse steps. He continues to speak out, sharing his story and inspiring others to confront injustice in their own lives. His advocacy has reached national platforms, sparking conversations about police reform and systemic bias. But he reminds us that change is not the work of one person alone. We all have a part to play, Darren says, whether it's holding our leaders accountable, supporting our neighbors, or simply choosing to listen with an open heart. We each have the power to contribute to a more just society. The question is, will we? Samantha Taylor's path is less public, but no less significant. She has embraced the hard work of rebuilding, participating in community outreach programs, and advocating for better training and accountability within law enforcement. Her story is a reminder that redemption is possible, but it requires humility, effort, and a genuine commitment to change. At community forums and workshops, Samantha has shared her experiences with candor, acknowledging the harm she caused and the lessons she's learned. It's not about erasing the past, she often says. It's about facing it and making sure it doesn't happen again. Every day, I ask myself how I can do better, not to make up for what I did, but to ensure that my mistakes lead to something positive. Her willingness to confront her own biases and take responsibility has resonated with many, serving as a powerful example of how change begins within. Judge Porter continues to work tirelessly to reform the justice system. His initiatives, from creating independent oversight committees to advocating for policy changes, are making a lasting impact. But he's quick to remind others that real change takes time and collective effort. No single trial, no single policy, and no single person can fix what's broken, Porter says. But every step we take matters. Every voice raised, every reform implemented, and every injustice confronted brings us closer to the world we want to see. As this story draws to a close, we are left with important questions. How can we, as individuals and as a society, contribute to a fairer, more equitable system? What steps can we take to ensure accountability, not just in law enforcement, but in every institution? How do we move from conversation to action? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones, and the answers will come not from a single person or moment, but from all of us, working together to build a better future. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. How do you think we can create a more just society? What role do you see yourself playing in the fight for accountability and equity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with others. Conversations like these are how change begins. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power we hold to make a difference. As Judge Porter said, justice isn't a destination, it's a journey we must all take together. Let's walk that path, hand in hand, toward a future where fairness and integrity guide every decision and every action.